Every time you've tried to fix someone's problem, you probably made it worse. Think about the last time a friend came to you with a crisis. Their voice tight with stress. You jumped in with solutions, with advice, with a 5-point plan to resolve everything. You felt helpful, productive, and you watched them get quieter. By the end of this, you will have a method that creates a profound sense of connection in under 1 minute, using just 3 specific sentences. The instinct to solve is a reflex. For many of us, it's the only tool we have. It's born from a deeply human place. We see someone we care about in pain, and that pain reflects back at us, making us feel anxious, helpless, and uncomfortable. Fixing their problem feels like a way to stop our own discomfort. It's a defense mechanism for us, a quick way to restore order. Our brains are ancient survival machines wired to identify threats and neutralize them. And to your brain, a friend's distress registers as a threat. So you get to work, a friend comes to you, their voice tight, talking about how they feel stuck in their career. Before they've even finished their sentence, your mind is racing. You're thinking of resume templates, networking contacts, online courses. You send them links to job postings later that night, feeling helpful. You've given them a plan, and the conversation flatlines. They say, "Yeah, maybe," and a subtle wall goes up. You can feel the energy drain from the room. Why? Because they weren't looking for a consultant. They weren't asking for a project plan. They were looking for a witness. They wanted someone to stand with them on the shaking ground, to acknowledge the fear and the confusion, not to immediately start paving a road out. The simple, unspoken request in almost every moment of vulnerable sharing is this: can you see how hard this is for me? Your solutions, however brilliant and well-intentioned, send a different message entirely. They say, this feeling is a problem, and we need to get rid of it as quickly as possible. It subtly, accidentally, invalidates the very experience they are trying to share. You tell them, without words, that their feeling is an inconvenience to be managed. So they retreat. They learn that their messy human experience isn't safe with you. You're the fixer, the advisor, the person with all the answers. And they are left feeling fundamentally misunderstood and more alone than when they started. But how do you resist this powerful, ingrained urge to fix? How do you become a witness without just nodding along in an awkward, helpless silence? There's a tool for this, borrowed from people whose entire job is to listen when a single wrong word can have devastating consequences. High-stakes negotiation teams are masters of de-escalation. Picture the scene. A bank, surrounded, someone inside, desperate, feeling cornered. The old model of negotiation was about pressure, about logic, about overpowering the other person with reasons why they should give up. It rarely worked. It only made the person dig their heels in deeper. The modern approach is completely different. It's rooted in a concept called tactical empathy. The negotiator's primary goal is to build a rapport so strong that the person on the other side begins to feel safe. They do this with a set of specific tools. One of the most potent is labeling. An agent might get on the line and say, "It sounds like you're worried about what's going to happen to your family." Or, "It seems like you're angry that nobody has taken you seriously until now." Notice the careful, deliberate phrasing. It sounds like, it seems like. These are observations, not accusations. They are hypotheses offered gently, without ego. This gives the other person a chance to agree, which builds connection, or even better, to correct. They might snap back, "I'm not worried, I'm furious." And the negotiator will reply calmly, "Okay, furious. Tell me about that." That correction is a victory. The person has just leaned in. They are clarifying their own emotional state, for you and for themselves. It's a collaborative process of discovery. This act of giving an emotion a name has a powerful neurological effect. It moves activity from the primitive reactive parts of the brain, the parts screaming danger, to the more thoughtful, observant parts. The person literally starts to calm down, simply because their chaotic inner world has been given a name. It's like turning a light on in a dark, messy room. The scary shapes are still there, but now they are identifiable. A chair, a table, a pile of clothes. Manageable. The person on the other side of the table doesn't feel analyzed or manipulated. They feel, for the first time in a long time, deeply and truly seen. This works in a life or death standoff where the stakes couldn't be higher. But what about in your kitchen, when your partner is complaining that the dishwasher is full again? Using a hostage technique might feel a little dramatic, even manipulative. The context is different. So how do you adapt this powerful psychological tool for the quiet, everyday crises of a normal life? You adapt it by turning it into a 60-second script for validation. It's a flexible sequence of 3 conversational moves that you can use in almost any situation, from the boardroom to the living room. The first move is the label. Just as the negotiators do, you start with, "It sounds like," or "It seems like," and you name the emotion you hear underneath the words. It's emotional detective work. Your friend says, "I'm so behind on this project, I'll never catch up." You resist the urge to talk about time management or calendar apps. You listen for the feeling. You say, "It sounds like you're feeling completely overwhelmed." Your partner says, "You never listen to me." You resist the powerful urge to defend yourself with a list of all the times you did listen. You pause. You listen to the music behind the words. You say, "It seems like you're feeling really ignored and unimportant right now." This is the critical entry point. It instantly signals that you are on their side, trying to understand their world, not defend your own. The second move is validation. This is the absolute core of the technique, and the part most people stumble on because it feels like surrender. You say, "That makes sense," or "I can see why you'd feel that way." This is where the magic happens. A clarification is essential here. You are not agreeing with their facts. You are not saying, "Yes, it's true, I am a terrible partner who never listens." You are simply acknowledging that, from their perspective, their feeling is a valid and logical conclusion. You are validating their emotional reality, which is a separate thing from objective reality. For the person speaking, this is like a drink of water in the desert. The need to be defensive to prove their case just melts away. They no longer have to fight you to justify their own feelings. The third move is the question. After you've labeled and validated, you gently open the door for more. But it must be the right kind of question. A bad question is, "So what are you going to do about it?" That throws them right back into the fire of problem solving. A good question is an invitation to explore. "Tell me more about that." Or, "What's the hardest part of that for you?" Think about the difference. One demands a plan, the other offers a space. Let's run a professional scenario. A coworker says, "I worked all weekend on this report, and my boss just glanced at it for 10 seconds and pointed out a typo." The old script. "Ugh, what a jerk. That's terrible. You should talk to HR." The conversation stops there. Now, the new script. You say, "Wow, it sounds like you feel incredibly dismissed and unappreciated." The label, they'll likely exhale and say, "Yeah, exactly. All that work for nothing." You follow with, "I get it. It makes total sense you'd feel that way after putting in so much effort." The validation. A small pause, then, "What was that moment like when he did that?" The question, you have just turned a simple office complaint into a moment of genuine human connection and trust. You haven't solved a thing. You've done something far more important. You've made them feel heard. But there's a legitimate fear that clings to this method. What if you do this and they just complain forever? What if validating the negativity just opens the floodgates and you're trapped in their drama for hours? This concern comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how human emotions actually work. The fear of opening the emotional floodgates is real, and it's the number one reason people avoid this kind of deep listening. Critics of this approach will often argue that by validating negative feelings, you're just encouraging more of them. You're rewarding the act of complaining. You're teaching people that the way to get your attention is to be negative. This is a perfectly logical, intelligent concern, and it is based on a completely flawed premise about the nature of emotion. An emotion is energy. It's information in motion. It's a signal from our nervous system that something needs attention. Think of it like a notification badge on your phone. If you ignore it, the notifications just stack up. The phone starts buzzing, vibrating, doing anything it can to get you to look. Emotions work the same way. When someone expresses a feeling and is met with solutions, arguments, or dismissal, that pressure builds. The internal alarm gets louder. They feel unheard, so they have to state their case again, more intensely, with more evidence. This is what creates the dreaded 2-hour negativity spiral. It's a desperate, escalating attempt to get someone to finally look at the notification. It's the sound of a nervous system begging to be seen. The 60-second validation process does the exact opposite. When you accurately label and validate a feeling, you are opening the notification. You are looking at the message. You open a release valve. The person feels the profound click of being understood. The pressure dissipates. Once an emotion has been fully expressed and witnessed, it loses its frantic energy. It has done its job of signaling an internal state. The need to keep broadcasting it fades away. Think of a small child who falls and scrapes their knee. It's a classic scenario. If a parent rushes over and says, "You're fine, stop crying, it's just a little scratch," the child often cries harder and louder. They are now crying about the scraped knee and the fact that their pain is being invalidated. Their reality is being denied. But if that same parent kneels down, looks them in the eye and says, with genuine empathy, "Wow, that really hurt, didn't it? I can see you're feeling scared and sad right now," something amazing happens. The child might take a shuddering breath, nod, and the storm of tears begins to subside. The feeling was seen, it was honored, and so it could pass. This is not just poetic, it's mechanical. This process is known as co-regulation. You are literally using your own calm nervous system to help regulate theirs. When you help someone put a name to their feeling, you are recruiting the more logical, language-oriented parts of their brain to observe the emotional reactive parts. You are lending them your calm, your regulated presence to help them regulate their own system. The goal is to let the emotion deliver its message and then move on. Your validation is the signature that confirms receipt of the package. The floodgates don't open. They close because the flood is no longer necessary. This is all powerfully effective for the people around you. But what about when you are the one drowning? What happens when you're overwhelmed and everyone around you is stuck in solution mode, throwing life preservers you don't have the energy to grab? The final, most important application of this tool has nothing to do with other people. This entire practice of listening begins with yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot offer a regulated presence to others if your own inner world is a storm of unacknowledged feelings. The most profound shift occurs when you turn this 60-second script inward. The next time you feel that familiar surge of anxiety, that hot flash of anger, that heavy blanket of despair, pause. Before you distract yourself, before you numb it with work or food or scrolling, before you jump to fix the external problem that you think is the cause, just pause and become your own witness. First, the label. Say it out loud, even in a whisper. Okay, I am feeling completely overwhelmed right now. I feel deeply disappointed. I am terrified of failing. Give the feeling a name. Drag it out of the shadowy, chaotic realm of sensation and into the clear light of language. Give it shape. Second, the validation. Be your own ally. Say to yourself, "It makes sense that I feel this way. Of course I'm overwhelmed. I've been juggling 3 people's jobs for 6 months. Anyone in this situation would feel disappointed." You must stop fighting yourself. You must stop telling yourself you shouldn't feel the way you feel. Your feelings are a logical response to your perception of the world. Honor that logic. Your validation is an act of profound self-compassion. Third, the question. Ask yourself a gentle, exploratory question. What does this feeling need from me right now? What is the kindest thing I can do for myself in this moment? What's one tiny thing that would make this feel 5% more manageable? The answer might be to take a 5-minute walk. It might be to drink a glass of water. it might be to close your laptop for the night. The answer is often surprisingly small. This internal practice is the foundation. From this place of self-validation and inner calm, your ability to listen to others expands exponentially. You stop needing them to be okay so that you can be okay. You can simply offer your presence without an agenda because you've already tended to your own needs. This is earned realism. This 60-second technique will not magically solve systemic problems. It will not pay your rent. It will not cure chronic illness or fix a toxic corporate culture. Pretending it can is a lie, but it is the necessary first step. It moves you out of a state of panicked, emotional reaction and into a state of clear, intentional action. It gives you the internal resources to face those larger problems with your full intelligence and resilience, instead of from a place of frayed nerve reactivity. The next time someone speaks to you from a place of pain or frustration, see it as a signal, a light on the dashboard. Your job is not to fix their engine while the car is speeding down the highway. Your job is to be the calm passenger who says, "This is a lot. Pull over for a minute. Let's just breathe." That moment of true connection is more powerful than any solution you could ever offer. It's the foundation upon which all real solutions are built. Starting right now, with the very next conversation you have, listen for the feeling, not the facts. Your goal is not to provide the answer. It is to provide the space where they can find their own. The greatest gift you can give another human being is the experience of being truly seen. And it all begins with 3 sentences.